Welcome to Game of the Week, Thursday nighter, Chess Castle, Minnesota, 90 plus 30 tournament, and we are showcasing tonight. By the way, welcome to my co-host Connor Weatherly, and we're showcasing Vincent against Thaddeus. So two strong players in the open section actually this time. So usually we're showing the premier section, but this week we're showing a very well played game in the open section. So have some very strong chess being played in both sections. So game starts out heading towards Nimzo, and Vincent takes up the challenge with 3 knight c3. So a lot of times players will play knight f3 here, kind of avoiding the Nimzo and keeping things in less theoretical waters, aiming for all sorts of different setups. But knight c3 is definitely a critical move fighting for the center, and both players showing that they are up to the theoretical task because, yeah, 4 queen c2 here, also the most common played move by masters in the position. 4 queen c2 and 4 e3 are really the kind of main lines against the Nimzo, although in this position there are so many different moves that are playable. You can play a3, f3, bishop d2, bishop g5, among other moves actually. So, but queen c2, very dynamic attacking chess, and you're trying to prevent, when bishop takes, you can take with the queen now, and you don't have to ruin your pawn structure getting these double pawns. So Thaddeus goes ahead and castles, also very main line. A3, again, one of the main lines. You can also play e4 here, pretty strong, get e4, e5, some attacking ideas in. But a3 takes, all making tons of sense. And opts for b6 here, the most played move by masters. Getting ready for this Queen's Indian. The nice thing about this is for white, though, is they haven't actually committed a knight to f3 yet. Queen's Indian in the Nimzo is extremely good if white has already played. Sorry there. If white has already played knight f3, because that means that f3 is not going to be able to be played. This square is a little bit soft, and you're not going to be able to oppose this bishop as well. So black's going to be able to maybe sink a knight into e4, fight for e4 later. But both sides, again, showing their strong knowledge of this position. f3, most played move by masters, and makes a ton of sense. It clamps down on this bishop, kind of a multi-purpose move. Also plays against this knight, controlling this knight, but really, they've already committed to this is where their bishop wants to be for the game. So let's set up this pawn chain and just blunt it. Always going to be a useful idea. And d5, we're getting into the middle game. I'm going to let Connor take it from here.
Yeah, e5 is a very interesting idea. Just trying to stake a claim in the center. I don't actually think e5 is really a move we want to be playing here, because if I'm white, I'm thinking I'm happy to take here because the only way to recapture is with the pawn. If we recapture with the queen, we're gonna see bishop takes knight, and after pawn takes, our king is wide open to some potential attacks in the future, and we may even have ideas of going h4 and doing some rook lift to checkmate. So we don't want to do this. If we take with the knight, we're just blundering our queen. And after it takes back here, takes here, and you back up, we can count material, and white is going to be up our a full pawn. Especially, we can tempo and just kick this knight out. We're also going to be up a few tempo. So this is not really a viable line. And if we decide to take with the bishop, this just helps us develop our pieces into the center. After we back up, now we can, I don't know, develop our bishop to d3. Seems like a very sensible square. And white is very happy. So we can only take here, but the downside of this is now this bishop right here is always going to be staring at a pawn. And even though maybe f3 looks a little silly because we thought it was trying to blunt the pawn, it's really not, because now that this knight is restricted from stepping forward into white's territory. So f3 is still justified. Oops, sorry. Going back to here. Instead, we see knight to h3. Knight to h3 in this position is also a completely fine play. The idea is just we're trying to develop our knight, and since we've already blocked the f3 square, we can't go here. So instead, we're going to put it on the f2 square and try and write it this way. We see in this position knight b to d2, just developing the last piece, very solid. And again, in this position, instead of doing this, I think what we want to try to do is stake our claim to the center, like we were doing earlier. And for black, after knight h3, maybe go c5 here. But developing your knight is also a very solid play, and then the game continues. We see b4 trying to gain a little bit of space on the queen side, and after h6 backs up. Backs up is maybe a little bit slow in this position. Maybe we consider taking. But backing up also makes sense. The big drawback is once we do this, now we can create some good chances on the queen side with black by opening up this file and creating an isolated a pawn, which maybe we can stack our queen with if we get the appropriate battery. But instead, we see e3, which back here after a5 we see e3, and after takes, which I don't think is super accurate, we're able to take back, takes, queen a8, and even though black is doing really well, it is a little bit hard to play. The engine actually favors black in this position simply because white hasn't developed, the king isn't safe, but you have to play super accurate. So in this position, we see queen b2. The idea of queen b2 is just we don't want to trade queens. White has a space advantage, and generally speaking, when you have a space advantage, you don't want to trade off pieces because it ends up being a vulnerability later on when pieces start getting behind our pawns. And in this position, Thaddeus playing black goes rook to c8. Rook c8 here, I think, gives up whatever advantage black really had in this position. I think what we need to do is we need to break open the center with a move like c5 here. Because right now, white's real advantage is their space. So if you can break up their space, now black is more developed and their king is a little bit weak. So we see bishop e2, and now we go c5, which I think makes good sense. We castle, rook e8. Rook e8, I think, is just admitting we did something wrong. Instead of seeing rook e8, what I would have liked to maybe see is something like queen to a4. And the idea of queen to a4 is after it takes, we go pawn takes here, and if you take us, we come knight to d5, and we're going to re-pick up this pawn, and black should have an edge here because we're still better developed, and now we even have a pass pawn, and we're going to recuperate this b6 pawn, and I think black is doing very well. But instead, we see rook to e8, which allows now white to capture, and after it takes, g5, white has to have a slight edge. In this position, either rook to a1 or bishop g3, I think, are quite strong. White chooses bishop g3, which I think makes very good sense. We see pawn to e5, maybe a little ambitious, considering the position to be pushing pawns like this, especially since we're already so open. I think that a more solid move here might be captures like this, just to open up the bishop. But instead, okay, we see e5, rook to a1, queen to c8, and then after rook to a5, I think black makes a fairly critical mistake here. Black really has to be capturing to avoid any pass pawn potential in the future. And now I'm playing against this one lone pawn. It's not so scary, but instead we see bishop to a6, and white finds, I think, a fantastic play. Just practically speaking, this is so hard to play against. We see rook takes a6, just a beautiful, beautiful sacrifice of an exchange. Because the point is, like what happened in the game, after queen takes, we see c takes, and now you see these two pawns. They're going to be marching down the board together, and they're very, very hard to stop. In this position, Thaddeus plays queen to a7, and then we see pawn to c6, and then after rook to b8, queen c2 is played. Queen c2, I think, is a little inaccurate because it allows black a lot of potential to attack, and the computer's top line here is check, king to f2, and then after rook to b2, the computer actually gives zeros, saying that black has sufficient counterplay in this position, despite the huge attack that it looks like white is mounting with these pawns running down the board. So in this position, instead, queen to c1 might be a little bit more accurate to stop this. But if you don't see this line, queen c2 is a fantastic play. We see knight takes, pawn takes knight. And now if we count material, white has to be better because we have two bishops for one rook. And so we're just a little bit up in material. We're up by a point. But more importantly, these bishops are going to have more dynamic play later on, which will bode well when we're trying to attack. So we see queen takes d7. We see bishop to f2, and the point of bishop f2 is we want to defend this pawn. And after rook to c1, queen d2, queen e6, we see e4. We're staking our claim in the center, and now this bishop is really coming to life. That we put on f2. Uh, we see knight c3, bishop to f1. A very solid construction. Now, with this construction right here, our king is never going to get into any trouble. Um, we see queen to c6. We're just trying to activate our queen and maybe make some attacking chances happen. But in this position, Vincent finds, I think, probably the best practical move. The computer says it's like move number 3, but this is by far the best move in my opinion. Knight takes g5. And the reason why this is so strong is if we look at this knight, we can't jump anywhere. The only square where we would actually have any potential future is maybe f2, but that requires us clearing out. So instead, what we do is we give it up for 1 pawn, 2 pawns, and now 3 pawns. So 3 pawns for a knight. So material is remaining balanced, but clearly this is going to be really good for us in the long term. So in this position, we see pawn to f6, queen check, king over, and we bring our queen over here. We're trying to spy this square, maybe get some check in the future. We come rook here. So now the point is if we check, we'll be able to block. Queen to f4, rook to g5. In this position, both players were getting low in time. I think the most principled way to play this is just to go h4, and the idea is just we're going to run our pawn down the board, and our bishops will be able to support it. But instead, we see queen to e3, rook to a5, good move. Bishop to e1. In this position, rook to a1, I think, is the only real shot that black has to maybe create some swindle chances. And the point is, so what was played in the game was rook to a3, but after rook to a1, there are a few moves. If Black loses their knight with the bishop, then we play rook to a3, and this pin is going to play, and this is, I think, very close to drawing, because once we trade more pieces off, it gets closer and closer to a draw. If we see queen takes, then we have check. And if we see bishop to f2, then we go queen to a6. And now we're going to be winning this bishop. And I think this is, practically speaking, a little bit harder to play. And if we see king to h1, now we have queen to b1, and we're going to be picking up at least one of the bishops. So I think this is maybe more of a practical chance, but instead we see rook to a3, just protecting the knight. And after h4, our queen starts to infiltrate, and queen h7. In this position, I think the only move we can really play is king to e8 to stay in the game at least a little bit. But instead, Thaddeus plays king to e6. And after queen to g8, we see resignation. The main reason we see resignation is this skewer along the G to A diagonal is playing in this particular case, and Thaddeus is going to lose his rook. And to add insult to injury, after we take, I believe this knight is trapped as well. So there's really not a lot we can do. So in this position, after we see queen to g8, we see black resign, and white gets a very, very beautiful victory. Just a very well understood, positionally played game, with some very nice tactics at the end, sacking the knight, sacking the rook, and then bringing our queen in like this.
Well, great game played by Vincent. Thank you so much for the analysis, Connor. Appreciate your time, and we're going to be back now and then with Game of the Week. So try to have it every week, but now and then going to take a break, but definitely hoping to see your game on Game of the Week soon. Come play on Thursday nights, 6:30 at Chess Castle, and your game could not only be featured on the live broadcast, but also follow-up videos like this, Game of the Week. So with that, thank you very much.